It's good to see each of you. Am I on? It's good to see each of you. There we are. Good. Good to see you. I'm glad that you're here with us on this beautiful day. A little bit more tolerable temperatures outside and a nice sunny day. So we're glad that you're here and able to just spend some time together in this place together with you. If you're joining us for the first time, we're in the middle of a series where we're talking about the concept of echo chambers, these ways in which we sometimes get into thinking where we can't see alternatives to our thinking. And when we stop learning how to think, and stop learning how to think critically, it will hamper us spiritually. It will hamper us as we think through the things that are in this world. And we've talked about a couple of ways, and really just we'll have this week and next week. We will probably wrap up next week. And it's the ideas behind how do we get into these predicaments where we struggle to know how to think. And thinking is a skill that has to be learned. There's a thing that you've probably heard, and it's been repeated many times before, is if you've ever had a teacher that didn't teach you what to think, but rather taught you how to think, that teacher will end up being one of your favorite teachers ever. And that is the challenge, is to make sure that we're in a place where that we learn how to think and not just what to think. One of the things in our world that I would say permeates our world, maybe in ways that we can even some ways scientifically prove, is that we live in a world that is permeated with the concept of fear. We are constantly being scared. There are people that profit on making sure you stay scared. And I want you to hear me at the beginning when I tell you that there are times that it is understandable that you might be scared and fearful. And this is not to add guilt onto your fear, but rather hopefully to help us understand the kind of the process of fear and what fear looks like. And so this morning we're going to be talking about what it is to have a fear-formed faith. A faith that does not operate out of freedom and does not operate out of knowing God and living in the joy of God, but rather a fear, a faith, and just a being that just simply operates because you're scared of something. Operating in a lifestyle where you live in constant fear, and when you live and you make decisions not based on what is good and healthy, but on what you are scared of and don't want, is a sure way to live a miserable life. Jesus came so that you may have life and have it to the full. Which means that you are not meant to come and just live in this world in a way in which you just survive. I recognize that some of you have had serious hardships in your life. And sometimes when you think about this concept of living a full life, it feels almost like a pipe dream to you. I recognize you on that, and I sit with you on it. And I hope this morning will be a sermon that will maybe encourage you to realize and recognize that it's so easy to become cynical. It's so easy to think that the world is against us. And some people, there's just a reality that some people get bad lots in life. And we sit with you, and we want to sit with you, but we also want to encourage you to hold on and not give in to the world's temptation to make your life a life that is run on fear. There has been a university, Chapman University, and they've been doing a study on fear. And one of the things that they've been doing this now for 10 years, so the data is beginning to accumulate. They do the study each year for 10 years. It's not just studying the last 10 years. So they get these lists, and I posted on Facebook this week, if you know the answers and I ask for answers, don't answer, okay? But for 10 years running now, though, they've been doing a study of the greatest fears that Americans have. And we'll look at some of those results in just a minute of that study and what it looks like. This is what one of the researchers from that study said. I've got a couple of quotes from a couple of the researchers. She said, "Our media usage habits stoke fears, and we've seen social media, cable news, and local TV news elevate a broad range of fears." You know what happened there? We didn't elevate it. Somebody else elevated it. So one lesson is to limit screen time and put down our smartphones. We are being inundated with fear. One of the other researchers said this: the vast majority of our respondents said that crime rates are rising dramatically. Do you feel like there's more crime than there was when you were a kid? This is one of my favorite things to ask people is, do you think people get abducted more now or when you were a kid? And almost indefinitely, if you look at the rates, people were abducted more when you were a kid than they are now. Difference is, you didn't know about it. So the vast majority of our respondents said that crime rates are rising dramatically, and they're wrong. Serial killings have been going down. Stranger abductions of children have been going down. Murders by strangers have been going down. Sexual assaults by strangers have been going down. He said one of the reasons for this misperception is an increased dependence on social media and news sites that rely on page views and engagement for revenue. Articles with attention-grabbing headlines are more likely to be shared, and a flood of dire warnings keep readers glued to their phones in a habit that we've come to now call doom scrolling. In other words, when something bad happens, we don't say, oh, that's bad, I'm going to put my phone away and go pray. We say, oh, what's the other news channel saying about this? Let me check my social media. Let me check Facebook. What are other people saying about this? I experienced this last night. I'm a Dallas Mavericks fan. And if you don't know what happened last night, the Dallas Mavericks last night traded their star player in what everybody's calling the most shocking trade in NBA history. I'm living in fear this morning while I preach this sermon. It was wild. And I had a friend message me and said, what just happened? And this was late at night. Well, I was like, what? I don't have any idea what he's talking about, because I had left my phone upstairs. I did a dumb thing. I do dumb things. And I made a big mess downstairs. I got a new fryer last night for Christmas. And I don't fry stuff very often, but I like every now and then to fry some chicken wings or something. It has this self-drain feature on it, and it's so cool. It filters the oil for you. Well, apparently it doesn't filter quite as much oil as I thought. And apparently I put a little too much oil in it. And so Hallie called me. I'm in bed. I'm about to go to sleep. And she said, the dog was over there licking the oil, and there's this puddle of cooking oil. It's huge. I mean, a large puddle of cooking oil. I mean, it took 2 rolls of paper towels. It was bad. It was crazy. And I thought, is he seeing in my house? I mean, like, did he just see what happened? He said, what just happened? And so I get on the internet and I start searching. And I said, did I accidentally share something? Is it on my Facebook page? What did I do? Did I make somebody mad? And then I was like, well, let me check. Maybe something's happening in the world. This a good friend, but not somebody who just like texts me randomly at 11:30 at night. What in the world's happening? And so I get on Twitter, and I struggled to sleep last night, y'all. Confession. But I couldn't stop, Like, I should have put it down and said, man, that stinks. This is just basketball. I know that, but I've invested a lot of time in this, so I should have put it down. But I doom scrolled last night, knowing I was going to preach about doom scrolling this morning. This temptation is real, and we can all find ourselves falling down it. And you need to know that people are making money depending on the fact that they can keep you looking for the next article and the next thing and the next thing. So in this study, they did the top 10 fears of 2024. And it wasn't like, hey, they went up to people and said, hey, tell me your worst fear, but rather they went through a list of 77 things, and they said, are you fearful of this? And for everything they said yes, it went up. So there's things that have higher ratings and lower, so it's not just like divided. So let me ask you, if you didn't look at the answers already, what do you think the greatest fear in the United States of America is? The most commonly reported fear in the United States of America? Terrorist attack is on the list, not one. Yeah. School shootings is actually, I think it's in the 30s or 40s on the list. Yeah. I think you know why? I think it's for some, it's they don't go to school. Other things. Political situation is, yes, we'll be a little bit more specific. There's a lot of political things. Somebody say a car wreck. I don't even know if car wrecks was on the list. One of the things was, the second rated thing I know was my having another person, a close family member get seriously hurt, right? It was interesting, me getting hurt was on the list, and I don't remember what number it was way down the list, but it was like in the 40s or something, or 30s or something. But higher than that was medical debt. So people are more fearful of having to pay for getting hurt than actually getting hurt in our world. Anybody else got anything? You've probably heard your whole life, though. What's the thing that you heard? The greatest fear is what? Public speaking. Yeah, public speaking. It's like 70 on the actual list of humans, actual people. So here's the number one thing that Americans are fearful of in 2024. You ready for it? Number one, corrupt government officials. Some of y'all are saying amen, but you're afraid to say amen. I know it. The number one listed fear in the United States of America in the year 2024 is corrupt government officials. Now, they've been following these trend lines, and what they find is, when Americans get more and more fearful of corrupt government officials? Election years. When you're being fed constantly. Now, listen, there are plenty of corrupt government officials. Okay? Plenty of them. But as a Christian, you need to know this. You're going to be tempted to be fearful of this as the rest of the world is. There are some things on this list that I get are totally reasonable and probably should have some fear of them. But if you believe in a God who's in control, corrupt government officials are not the worst thing in your life, because God will handle those things. But it's amazing how you can follow the trends, and they follow the trends on some of these things, and they see years where certain things go up or down based on what's happening in the world. Obviously, when COVID came along, there was this spike in fear of disease, which made total sense because it was all around us, and we were all having to live through it. This is, I don't know if you can see it, but this is the fear of election outcome by party, which is like in the top 15 or so is fear of election outcome. And here's one of the interesting things. I don't know if you can see that, and if you can't, it's fine. But if you see that thing over on the left, that's Republicans, Democrats, and Independents. And they're all within just a few points of all being just as scared as the other one. Because we've been told that we have to fear that. And the people on the left tell you to fear it, the people on the right tell you to fear it, and even the people in the middle tell you to fear it. The people on the left say fear the right, the people on the right fear the left. The people, like I consider myself very much in the middle, say we've got to fear them all. And I want you to recognize that there are people in this world who make money off of you staying scared, off of you being pumped with fear. Here's the top 10 list. I don't know if you can read. I'll read through it quickly. People I love becoming seriously ill. Cyber terrorism is 3. People I love dying is 4. Russia using nuclear weapons is 5th. Not having enough money for the future is 6th. U.S. becoming involved in another world war. 7 and 8 are actually tied, and with North Korea using nuclear weapons. Terrorist attacks, biological warfare. These are the top 10. I want you to notice, I think it's something like 7 or 8 of those are, I think 8, at least 8, are things that you are constantly being inundated with. They are constantly putting in your face, you need to be scared of this. And hear me clearly, I understand that there are danger in some of these things. I get that and understand that. I'm not telling you that there's not some legitimacy to this. I'm telling you that if you live your life in fear, though, you're not going to live the kind of life that God called you to live. And it will not bear the fruit that God called you to live. And you are going to look like the rest of the world. If you want people, you want to bring people to God, you want people to know God, and you want to look like Jesus, you've got to make a conscious decision in your life not to be a person who is consumed and lives by fear. I want to tell you that fear is the modern media, and not just the modern media. This happens in religious circles too. I call it their drug of choice. Why is fear what they pump? I mean, there are plenty of good stories out there that they could cover that they don't. There are plenty of good people doing good things, making a difference in our world that you will never see on TV. And it's because that takes time, and it's been just proven people don't tune in for that near as much. Because fear is highly addictive. Because when we get a little bit of it, we, for some reason, without even realizing what's happening in our mind, we end up wanting more. There is an unlimited supply of fear. There are almost an unlimited supply of legitimate things that you need to fear, but don't worry, if they run out, they'll just make some up. It is cheap to produce fear. It doesn't take a lot of money or time to make a quick website and put and exaggerate something that they know people will click on out of fear. There is money in fear. And here's the thing, is none of us tend to think that this is a drug. None of us think we should be scared of fear, right? I mean, you should be fearful of things you should be fearful of, but fear itself is not the thing you should be fearful of. And I'm here to tell you that people are producing fear. And if the number one thing that Americans should be fearful of is fear, living a life consumed by it. And it is always luring us in. Here's the here's the sad part. It's not cool. The same people who get you scared are going to turn around and tell you that they're the answer to fix the problem. And guess what? They have frequently no real actual interest in fixing the problem. Because if the problem gets fixed, you may not have to worry about them anymore. You may not have to click on that website. You may not have to scroll on that feed. You may not have to open that app if they give you the answer. And so they're always luring you in with an antidote, and they're just stringing you along. And guess what? They don't have it. There's a world telling you they've got an answer for this, and they don't. Now, I'm here to tell you that this business of fear is really ancient. As a matter of fact, it starts in the first pages of the Bible, and it goes all throughout the Bible. This constant thing where fear, and I call it not just fear, we're going to look at a couple of examples. I call it the business of fear. People who are making their power and their livelihood, their money and their wealth, and their prestige and their place and their status from fear has happened all throughout the world and all throughout society. And the Bible addresses this. I want to take us to Isaiah chapter, Ezekiel. I think this says Isaiah, and I messed it. I asked, Hoseas did a really good job of fixing it on his, and I didn't fix mine. Sorry. Ezekiel chapter 13, and the people of Israel are in Babylonian captivity. There's real things in their life that are just not going well in that moment and that time. And there is an antidote for this. They need to turn back to God. Their history has shown they need to turn back to God. It's time to turn back to God. And Ezekiel is prophesying about this, and here's what it says. It says, the word of the Lord came to me. He says, Son of man, prophesy against the prophets. You need to be a prophet against the prophets of Israel who are now prophesying. He says, say to those who prophesy out of their own imagination. In other words, they are making stuff up as they go. He said, prophesy to them, and here's what you need to say. He says, hear the word of the Lord. This is what the sovereign Lord says. Woe to the foolish prophets who follow their own spirit and have seen nothing. Many of the people that the world puts forth as experts in religion, in politics, and all those things, I'm just telling you, many of them are not actual experts. They're just propagandists that know how to draw an audience. And he says, listen, they're just bringing you in. They're luring you in. He says, listen, this is really I feel like this We need to put this on billboards somewhere. Your prophets, Israel, are like jackals among the ruins. In other words, you're in a disaster, and they're not saying, oh, a disaster, let's turn back to God. They say, oh, a disaster. That looks like a good way to make some money. That looks like a good way to gain some power. That looks like a good way to elevate myself. And he says, you need to tell them this. And he continues. Let's go here. There we go. Verse 5. You've not gone up to the breaches in the wall. There's some things you could go to do to repair it for the people of Israel. You could go actually do some good and help rebuild your city. But you haven't done that, so that it will stand firm in the battle of the day of the Lord. Their visions are false, and their divinations a lie. Even though the Lord has not sent them, they say, the Lord declares, and expect him to fulfill their words. Have you not seen false visions and uttered lying divinations when you say, the Lord declares, though I have not spoken? They're offering the antidote, aren't they? They're saying, listen, if you listen to me, I can solve this problem. Just come follow me. Give me a like and a follow. Right? Click on my news station. He says, listen, therefore, this is what the Lord says about that. Because of your false words and lying visions, I'm against you. That's not me. He says, my hand will be against the prophets who see false visions and utter lying divinations. They'll not belong to the counsel of my people. They won't be listed in the records of Israel. They're not in the Bible. They're just faceless people who maybe got something on the short term, and guess what? They got nothing in the long term. He says, nor will they enter the land of Israel. And then you're going to know that I am the Lord, the sovereign Lord. If he's saying, listen, you go and these people, and there are going to be people follow them, and they're not going to get anything from it. Except frustration and anger eventually when they realize that they've been sold a bill of lies. He said, but you need to recognize I'm the sovereign Lord, and I take care of things, and I can handle things. It says, because they lead my people astray, and they cry out, peace. You're living in destruction, and they're saying, hey, peace, right over here, peace, follow me. When there is no peace. And notice this, when a flimsy wall is built, they cover it with whitewash. They make it look better than it actually is. In the South, we call that, they put lipstick on a pig. I like our version better. I wish it said that. They wouldn't have said that because they were Jews and pigs had, yeah, anyway, all right, they wouldn't put lipsticks on the pigs. They're making things look better than they actually are. And it said, but here's the thing is you didn't fix the structure, it's going to fall. You made it look good, but it's not really good. It's going to fall. And it said rain's going to come in torrents. There's going to be days where the walls that you're kind of just patching up to make it look good, and you're not really lifting a finger. You're not actually contributing to fixing the problem. You're just giving people false hope. It says there's going to be a day that rain's going to come again. I don't know that it's talking about literal rain or figurative rain. It's probably talking a little bit of both. I don't know if it's talking about literal walls or figurative walls. Probably a little bit of both. But he's saying, hey, you're building up something that looks pretty, but it's not. And there's going to be a day that I'm going to send this rain down and these hailstorms down, and violent winds are going to come. And when the wall collapses, will people not ask you, where's the whitewash you covered it with? You didn't actually fix the problem. He's saying there's going to be a day of reckoning for people who are selling you fear and then telling you that they're the answer to solve it. He says, he tells Ezekiel, he says, you go prophesy against them and you tell them there's a day coming, you better change your ways. You better humble yourself before the God that can actually do something about this. Because you keep selling this and then selling yourself as the answer to the problem, you are not capable of solving these problems. We could go back to that list, couldn't we? And guess what? None of the people that are making money off selling you information about those things has a clue how to fix it. They're real things, but they're not even really interested, but they want to paint you a picture that you can follow after. And when it all falls down and it will inevitably fall down, we'll ask, why did we believe the lies? Speaking of whitewashed people, there was a people in the New Testament that Jesus encountered that he said were like whitewashed tombs. And it's in that same section, Matthew 23, where he's listing these woes to them. He talks about them. He says that they tie up heavy, cumbersome loads on and put them on other people's shoulders, but they themselves are not willing to lift a finger. Does that sound familiar? We just saw it in Ezekiel, didn't we? He said they put things on others. They want other people to go fix the wall, but they're not actually out there putting in the work. And he's saying that about the Pharisees. He said they don't lift a finger. He says everything they do is done for people to see, so that they can gain the power and the reputation. And let me show you. I'm going to link that together with John 12. Yet at the same time, many, even among the leaders, believed in him. This is about Jesus. And it's talking about these Pharisees. He says, but because of the Pharisees, they believed, they saw the answer. The answer was right in front of them. It was Jesus. And they believed that Jesus was the answer. But they were stuck in such an echo chamber. Notice what happens. But because of the Pharisees, but because of these people who have built themselves up in society on the backs of lies and deceit and fear-mongering and telling you they were the answer to the problem, they would not openly acknowledge their faith for fear that they would be kicked out of the synagogue, for fear of the consequences of what will happen if I choose to go left in a world that says go right. They feared the people who had this faulty, fake, temporary power. And instead of sinking their teeth into the thing that would actually bring peace, they shirked back in fear. And it tells us why. For they loved human praise more than the praise from God. They saw something in Jesus that looked like a real, legitimate answer that could actually help them. And it looked good. But they had been so warped in their thinking that they thought it was more important to be important in the synagogue than it was to be important in the sight of God become flesh right in front of them. They believed that he was the Messiah, that he was the chosen one, that he was the one that could save them. And they chose to go the way they had told a good Jew should go. And I want to challenge you to know the antidote for fear that the world is trying to inundate you with. Because there is an antidote for this line of thinking that will cause us to go nowhere fast. 1 John tells us about it. This is how we know that we live in him. Living in him. That sounds good, doesn't it? And he in us. He's given us his Spirit. The Father has given us his Spirit. And we have seen and testified that the Father sent his Son to be the Savior of the world. If you acknowledge that Jesus is the Son of God, God lives in them and they live in God. You're connected to God. He says, and so we know and we rely on the love of God and that love that he has for us. The world is going to get you and ask you to rely on all types of stuff. And he says, listen, the love that you have from God is something that you can take and you can rely on. And he says, and so we know and rely on the love of God has for us. God is love, and whoever lives in love lives in God and God in them. He said, listen, we talked about last week. You plant yourself right up next to God. When the world starts feeling really scary, you don't run into more scary stuff. You run to a God who can actually help with the problem. Who actually has answers that are not just about the here and the now, but they're about the eternal and the forever. He says this is how love is made complete among us, so that we will have confidence on the day of judgment. Nothing makes me sadder than a Christian without confidence about where they're going into eternity. I believe it's rooted in a sense that we've somehow trusted ourselves to be the answer to our problems. And we haven't really relied on a God to be the answer to our problems. He says, know this, there's no fear in love. There's no fear in love. And before we get arrogant and confident and say, oh, if we love people, then there won't be any more fear, he kind of makes it clear, doesn't it? He says this, he says, but perfect love drives out fear. Anybody in here got perfect love? Anybody? Anybody in here who has loved perfectly? Anybody in here who has loved their spouse perfectly? Anybody want to raise your hand? I mean, like, I will let, mic's off, it's yours. I mean, anybody that has loved their kids perfectly? Anybody that has loved their neighbor perfectly? Is there anybody in here who has just loved one person perfectly? Much less everybody. He says, listen, love is the answer to this. And he's not discounting the fact that we've got to have love for each other. He says, but this perfect love drives out fear. People can help, but only perfect love drives out all the fear. There's only one kind of love. He says, because fear has to do with punishment, has to do with what's going to hurt you. And he says, the one who is feared has not been made perfect in love. We love because he first loved us. We only know perfect love because we have a model of perfect love. And that model is Jesus Christ crucified, is Spirit living within us, and it's the Father who put this all into motion. That is perfect love. And in perfect love, we don't have to fear. I met with a client this week. She gave me permission to share this. I'll change some details so there won't be anything that would lead anybody to know who it was. She's dealing with a real rough time in life. She's got a family member who's very ill. And she also has some physical ailments of herself that makes it tough for her to do some physical jobs. And we've been working on several things, but working on being able to recognize the supports that she does have and lean into those. The people that are around her. Her faith is important to her. And leaning on the people of faith around her and other things. But she has a neighbor that she's made friends with through the years. And her neighbor has a grandson. He's a teenager. And every week there's a household chore that she struggles with and she can't do. And every week that teenager comes over, walks in the door, acknowledges her sick relative who can no longer reciprocate, goes and handles the chore, and leaves every week. And she told me, she said, I tried to pay him, and he won't take no money. She said, I tried to, and she said, I'm in such a situation with this family, I could make him take the money. I know his grandmother enough, I could make him take the money. But what he doesn't know is every time he leaves that door, I've got an envelope, and I put $10 more in it. And every time he said, right now he's got an envelope in my house, it's got a pretty good bit of money in it. And every time he leaves, I put $10 more in it. And she said, one day, he's going to need that money, and it's going to be here waiting for him. Whew, man, this woman who's going through some real stuff, and I was telling you she's going through some real stuff. And I got to thinking about that. And I got to thinking about how many of us would take the money. And I got to thinking about whether I would take the money. I like to think I wouldn't, but I don't know. But I got to thinking, we go through some real stuff in this life. There's so many times we don't see how this is going to work out. And we have a God that acts just like that. And we may not even be able to see what He's doing behind the scenes, so that when we face something we can't overcome, He's going to be ready to step in. We might not even be able to see what He's working out behind the scenes, so that the day comes and we need Him, He's ready and He's there and He's present. We may not even be able to see what's happening behind the scenes. That kid has somebody who's loving him in a way that he doesn't even know and recognize it and realize. We have someone loving us, and we do recognize and realize it. And sometimes I think we fear if the check that is God will bounce one day. Like, is He really going to keep taking care of us? Is He really going to keep working behind the scenes for our good? Let me just encourage you, Christian, to know that everything you do in secret, not to be seen by men, every act you create out of love, you have a God that's putting some money in an envelope. It's not real money, because you won't care about real money when you're in the presence of God. And one day, when you need it, it's going to be there for you. What a safety net to have. Russia may nuke us all. We may be right to worry about cyber terrorism. We may lose our life this very day to some catastrophe. Somebody may leave this auditorium, get in their car, and get hit by a drunk driver today. And let me just tell you something. That's scary. But you don't have to fear it. Because you've got a God who will be ready when you need it. And I hope you've trusted in Him. I hope you have made Him your Savior. I hope you have made Him your King and your God, because He's the one thing in this world we love, because He first loved us. He has proven Himself to be faithful, so we put our faith into Him, knowing He's working behind the scenes for our good. And when we need Him, He'll be ready for us. It'll be waiting on us. If you don't have that hope, we'd love for you to make that your hope. If you have any needs, put your faith into Jesus. The solutions of this world will drive you miserable, and it will lead you nowhere. It just doesn't work out. I promise you, it does not work out. Lean into Jesus. If you need to do that publicly, we'd love to help you. But you don't have to. Just make a decision today. I've been trusting. I've been too fearful. I've been like scared. And one thing I just tell you, if you're scared, it means you've got to trust in God more. It doesn't mean it's unnatural. It just means you've got to trust in God. So when you leave here, make it your commitment this week that I'm going to lean on the one who has shown Himself trustworthy. And I'm not trustworthy. The news sources that you're getting news from are not trustworthy. You don't, because they have a profit. This is a business. They're making money off of it. Don't allow them to keep you from thinking, because I'm convinced that thinking people will realize there has to be a God. And thinking people will realize that God makes sense in the person of Jesus Christ. And thinking people will realize that saving themselves will never work. And they'll lean into Jesus. Just make that your life's mission this week. Lean into Jesus. When you are threatened to be fearful, lean into Jesus. Lean into Jesus. Lean into God. Lean into the Spirit living in you. He will be faithful. If you have spiritual needs you'd love to let your family know about, we'd love to help you while we'll sing together.